But it's just like, you can't even bring up how well black people are doing in sports. Everybody gets all weird about it, which I don't understand, because it's like a compliment, you know? Like, feel how weird it is right now. You know, I just brought that shit up. I'm saying something good, right?
Taboo is a new book that just came out by John Entine. Why do blacks do so well at sports, and why are we afraid to talk about it?
Some of the most controversial, really taboo topics in sports today, including whether nature or nurture makes the best athlete and whether some ethnic groups are better suited to succeed at athletics.
And that's the thing with athletes and stereotypes. If you're white, regardless of the sport, you're often talked about in terms of intelligence or effort or how great of a leader you are. If you're black, it's about physical strength, natural ability, or athleticism. If you're Latino, maybe you're fiery. Asian, intelligent, good team player. Trust me, now that you're aware of this, you're going to see it every time you look at the sports section. Those stereotypes are good. They're positive.
No, I get into those arguments all the time. All the time. Friends of mine will be like, well, how come anytime a black athlete does something, they say it's an athletic move? Anytime a white athlete does it, they say it's an intelligent move.
In many ways, it would have been much better if Mother Nature had made people genetically all the same. Cooperation would be easier, and we could design just one type of society that would fit everybody. However, we are not all the same. Even children within the same family differ from each other genetically. If we examine how wide the differences are, even between brothers and sisters who share the same food, watch the same TV, go to the same schools, and have the same parents, how much more different from each other must we expect the human races to be?
There are these biological differences, and this is something that has been so strenuously avoided since, I guess, the bell curve first came out 20-odd years ago. And I think the consequences of avoiding it, it's the old thing, give you a short-term benefit, but the long-term catastrophes, I think, are still accumulating.
With respect to crime, for example, in both the United States and Western Europe, race is one of the best predictors, and quite possibly in other parts of the world too. The Chinese and Japanese, whether assessed in their home countries, North America, or the United Kingdom, have a lower incidence of crime than do Europeans. African-descended people, while consisting of less than 1/8 of the population of the United States or of London, England, currently account for over 50% of the crime in both places. Since about the same proportion of victims say that their assailant was black, the arrest statistics cannot be blamed entirely on police prejudice. This morning I read estimates in the Globe and Mail that confirm that these figures appear to apply to Canada, or at least Toronto. Blacks currently appear to make up between 2 and 5% of Toronto's population, and they also appear to be responsible for between 32 and 40% of Toronto crime. Finally, we turn again to the issue of intelligence test scores. Since the time of World War I, when widespread testing began, blacks have scored about 15 IQ points lower than whites on tests of intelligence and educational achievement, whether tested in the United States, the United Kingdom, Jamaica, Nigeria, Tanzania, or Uganda. Fewer people are aware, however, that Orientals score about 5 points higher than do whites on exactly the same measuring instruments.
Race is the strongest predictor of SAT scores over the last 4 years that I have data for which I have data. Contrary to expectation, then, it appears that racial and ethnic differences have been growing rather than diminishing. And equally significant, these differences remain, these racial and ethnic differences remain even after controlling for differences in family income and parental education.
Because it's largely genetic.
Right.
And, that's, as I understand, that was the argument. I haven't read this book.
I don't think it's saying largely genetic, but I think they're saying that genetics play a factor and environment plays a factor. I think some people are not willing to look at genetics if it shows an unfavorable trait in minorities. They don't want to look at it. They deny it.
That's true.
The armed forces concluded that if you had an IQ of 83 or less, there wasn't anything you could possibly be trained to do in the military at any level of the organization that wasn't positively counterproductive. Okay, you think, well, so what? 83, okay. Yeah, 1 in 10. 1 in 10. That's 1 in 10 people. And what that really means, that, as far as I can tell, is if you imagine that the military is approximately as complex as the broader society, which I think is a reasonable proposition, then there's no place in our cognitively complex society for 1 in 10 people. So what are we going to do about that? The answer is no one knows.
Affirmative action began as riot control. Harlem was up in flames. Bed-Stuy was up in flames. Newark was up in flames. And if we don't do something to bring in young black people to the mainstream economically and educationally, we're not sure the society will hold together. The words affirmative action initially were attempts to deal with discrimination that African Americans faced in the labor market. There were executive orders by President Kennedy and President Johnson which said employers had to make a good faith effort to use affirmative action in their hiring and recruitment policy.
In far too many ways, American Negroes have been another nation, deprived of freedom, crippled by hatred, the doors of opportunity closed to hope.
I don't believe that students should be treated differently based on their race.
There are lots of stereotypes about Asian Americans. I probably fit some of them. I did well in school, I played a couple instruments, I went to Yale and became a doctor. I now volunteer to interview Yale applicants each year. My ties to the college are strong, especially since my dad also went there in the 1960s. At the time, there were only about 10 Asians in his class. Today, Asians make up about a fifth of the students on campus. In fact, there are now so many Asians at elite colleges that many Asians fear affirmative action makes colleges hold them to a higher standard. Asian students straight out ask me if being Asian will hurt their chances, or if it's better to mark their race as other instead of Asian. Seriously, we've reached the point where kids are afraid to admit their own ethnicity?
The Justice Department weighed in today on a discrimination lawsuit against Harvard University. The suit claims the school illegally limits the number of Asians admitted. As Jan Crawford reports, the case could lead to another Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action.
In a 40-page legal brief, the Justice Department said Harvard engages in unlawful racial balancing when selecting its incoming classes, siding with Asian American students who are suing the university. Harvard's race-based admissions process significantly disadvantages Asian American applicants, the Justice Department said, compared to applicants of other racial groups. The court filing comes as Harvard is fighting to avoid a trial in the 2014 lawsuit, which argues the university holds Asian American students to higher academic standards than white and other minority students, allegations Harvard denies.
Harvard says that they look at the whole student applicant. They don't look at just grades and SAT scores. They look at the whole thing. What kind of activities does a kid do after school? Do they do any public works? And so basically what we have now is a war of conflicting accounts of how do you get into Harvard and does Harvard really, racially profile?
People don't like the idea of IQ because it seems so arbitrary. You have a high IQ. Well, it's not like you deserve it exactly. You're set up that way pretty much right from the beginning. It's a very, 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 very stable. You can make a high IQ person stupider by, not educating them up to the level of their possibility, but taking someone who has a low IQ and trying to raise that, it's like, if you can figure out how to do that, well, it's Nobel Prize time for you, because people have tried that a lot.